Question 1. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential need to gather information regarding a suspected violation of U.S. import regulations within the jurisdiction of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, in New York. Special Agent Miller is considering various methods to obtain relevant intelligence. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and legally sound approach for Agent Miller to pursue? Option A. Rely exclusively on anonymous tips received through the CBP tip line, without any independent verification or corroboration, to initiate enforcement actions. Option B. Develop a comprehensive investigative plan that identifies specific intelligence gaps, outlines lawful methods for information acquisition, e.g., review of import manifests, interviews with relevant parties after advising of rights, or seeking necessary legal process, and ensures all actions are documented in accordance with CBP and DHS guidelines. Option C. Confront the suspected importer and demand immediate access to all business records, implying negative consequences if cooperation is not provided. Option D. Immediately attempt to access the electronic records of the suspected importer without a warrant or subpoena based on the initial suspicion. The correct answer is B. Develop a comprehensive investigative plan that identifies specific intelligence gaps, outlines lawful methods for information acquisition, e.g., review of import manifests, interviews with relevant parties after advising of rights or seeking necessary legal process, and ensures all actions are documented in accordance with CBP and DHS guidelines. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for swift information gathering during an active investigation and the imperative to adhere to established legal and ethical boundaries. Special agents must exercise sound judgment to balance investigative urgency with the protection of individual rights and the integrity of evidence. Failure to do so can jeopardize the investigation, lead to the suppression of evidence, and result in disciplinary action or legal repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a systematic and legally compliant method of obtaining information. This includes clearly identifying the investigative objective, determining the most appropriate and lawful means of gathering information based on the specific circumstances, and ensuring all actions are documented meticulously. For instance, if the objective is to obtain testimonial evidence, the agent would consider whether a voluntary interview, a formal deposition, or a subpoena is most appropriate, always respecting the rights of the individual. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of due process, the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, and the Department of Homeland Security's own investigative guidelines, which mandate lawful and ethical conduct. It prioritizes the admissibility of evidence and the overall legitimacy of the investigation. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to bypass established protocols and directly access sensitive personal information without proper authorization or legal basis. This could involve unauthorized access to electronic devices or personal records. Such an action would violate federal statutes governing privacy and data protection, as well as DHS policy, potentially leading to criminal charges against the agent and the immediate disqualification of any evidence obtained. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on informal, uncorroborated tips from unvetted sources without any independent verification or corroboration. Tips can be a starting point. Acting solely on them without further investigation or legal authorization to gather evidence would be professionally unsound. It risks building an investigation on false premises, wasting resources, and potentially infringing on the rights of innocent individuals if acted upon without due diligence. This fails to meet the standard of probable cause or reasonable suspicion required for many investigative actions. A third incorrect approach would be to pressure or coerce an individual into providing information through intimidation or misrepresentation of legal rights. This not only violates ethical standards for law enforcement, but also constitutes a violation of an individual's Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and their right to counsel. Evidence obtained through coercion is inadmissible in court and can lead to severe legal and disciplinary consequences for the agent. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the investigative goal. They must then identify all available legal and ethical tools for achieving that goal, assessing the risks and benefits of each. This involves consulting relevant statutes, regulations, and departmental policies. A critical step is to seek legal counsel when in doubt about the legality or propriety of an investigative action. Documentation is paramount at every stage, ensuring a clear audit trail of decisions and actions. Finally, a commitment to upholding the rights of all individuals involved, regardless of their suspected involvement, is essential for maintaining the integrity of the investigation and the agency. Question 2. System analysis indicates that a Department of Homeland Security, DHS, Office of Inspector General OIG, special agent, while conducting an investigation in California, has uncovered information that includes classified details about a foreign government's internal security protocols and the identities of confidential informants. The agent has meticulously documented these findings in handwritten notes. Considering the sensitive nature of this information and the regulatory environment governing federal investigations, which of the following approaches best represents professional conduct and adherence to legal and ethical obligations? Option A. Redact the classified information and informant identities from the handwritten notes before filing them in the OIG's standard record-keeping system, as a precautionary measure to avoid potential security breaches. Option B. Securely store the handwritten notes in a locked OIG-issued briefcase and immediately transcribe all findings, including classified details and informant identities, into the OIG's secure, encrypted case management system, ensuring proper classification markings are applied, and access is restricted to authorized personnel on a need-to-know basis. Option C. Share the handwritten notes, including all classified details and informant identity, with a trusted senior agent in another division of the OIG who is not directly involved in the current investigation, believing their experience might offer valuable insights. Option D. Upload the handwritten notes with all original details intact to a secure personal cloud storage account for safekeeping, as the OIG's internal systems can sometimes be slow to access. The correct answer is B. Securely store the handwritten notes in a locked OIG-issued briefcase and immediately transcribe all findings, including classified details and informant identities, into the OIG's secure, encrypted case management system, ensuring proper classification markings are applied, and access is restricted to authorized personnel on a need-to-know basis. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Department of Homeland Security, DHS, OIG special agent due to the sensitive nature of information obtained during an investigation and the potential for unauthorized disclosure. Maintaining the integrity of an ongoing investigation while adhering to strict federal regulations regarding information handling and reporting is paramount. The agent must balance the need to document findings with the imperative to protect classified or sensitive information from improper dissemination, which could compromise national security, endanger individuals, or jeopardize the investigation's outcome. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting all findings and observations in a secure, authorized system, ensuring that any sensitive or classified information is handled strictly in accordance with DHS and OIG policies, including proper classification marking and access controls. This approach directly aligns with the principles of evidence integrity and operational security mandated by federal law and DHS directives. Specifically, the Homeland Security Act of 2002, as amended, and subsequent OIG directives emphasize the need for thorough and secure record-keeping, as well as the protection of sensitive law enforcement information. By utilizing approved secure systems and adhering to classification protocols, the agent upholds their duty to investigate thoroughly while safeguarding critical information. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves broadly sharing detailed investigative notes, including sensitive details about informants and potential evidence, with colleagues not directly involved in the case, even if they are within the OIG. This violates federal regulations concerning the dissemination of sensitive law enforcement information and could lead to unauthorized disclosure, potentially compromising the investigation and violating privacy rights. Such actions would contravene the principles of need-to-know access and could expose the OIG to liability. Another incorrect approach is to omit significant findings from the official report to avoid the complexities of handling sensitive information. This failure to document complete findings undermines the OIG's oversight mission and prevents accurate assessment of potential misconduct or vulnerabilities. Federal regulations require comprehensive reporting of all relevant findings, and selective omission constitutes a dereliction of duty and a violation of reporting mandates. A third incorrect approach is to store investigative notes on an unsecured personal device or cloud storage. This poses a severe security risk, violating federal data protection laws and DHS cybersecurity policies. Such actions could lead to data breaches, compromise classified or sensitive information, and result in severe disciplinary action, including potential criminal charges. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must adopt a proactive and compliant approach to information management. This involves understanding and strictly adhering to all applicable federal laws, DHS directives, and OIG policies regarding information security, classification, and reporting. When encountering sensitive information, the decision-making process should prioritize consulting relevant policy manuals, seeking guidance from supervisors or legal counsel if unsure, and utilizing only authorized and secure systems for documentation and dissemination. The core principle is to ensure that all investigative actions are both thorough and legally sound, protecting both the integrity of the investigation and the sensitive information involved. Question 3. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a Department of Homeland Security, DHS, OIG special agent, while investigating potential fraud in a federal contract in California, has developed probable cause to believe evidence of the crime is located within the suspect's residence. The suspect, who is present at the residence, has made statements that could be interpreted as admissions, but the agent has not yet provided Miranda warnings. The agent is considering whether to immediately search the residence based on these statements or to seek a search warrant. Which of the following actions represents the most appropriate and legally sound approach for the special agent? Option A. Conduct an immediate warrantless search of the suspect's residence based on the probable cause derived from the suspect's statements. Option B. Dismiss the suspect's statements as unreliable and abandon the investigation without further action. Option C. Immediately cease all questioning of the suspect, secure the premises to prevent the destruction of evidence, and contact legal counsel or a supervisor to obtain guidance on securing a search warrant. Option D. Continue questioning the suspect to elicit further incriminating statements, believing that these statements will provide sufficient justification for a warrantless search. The correct answer is C. Immediately cease all questioning of the suspect, secure the premises to prevent the destruction of evidence, and contact legal counsel or a supervisor to obtain guidance on securing a search warrant. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires special agents to balance the immediate need for information gathering with the strict legal and ethical boundaries governing evidence collection and the rights of individuals. Missteps can compromise investigations, lead to inadmissible evidence, and result in disciplinary action or legal repercussions. The agent must exercise sound judgment, adhering to established protocols to ensure the integrity of the investigation and the Department of Homeland Security's, DHS, mission. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves immediately ceasing all questioning and securing the premises to prevent the destruction of evidence, while simultaneously contacting legal counsel or a supervisor to obtain guidance on the proper procedure for obtaining a search warrant. This approach is correct because it prioritizes adherence to Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures, as interpreted by Supreme Court precedent like Miranda v. Arizona and its progeny. By halting the interrogation and seeking legal advice before proceeding with a search, the agent respects the individual's rights and ensures that any subsequent evidence collection is conducted lawfully and will be admissible in court. This aligns with DHS OIG's mandate to conduct thorough and lawful investigations. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to continue questioning the individual to elicit further incriminating statements, believing that the information obtained might justify a warrantless search. This is ethically and legally flawed because it risks violating the individual's Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and potentially renders any subsequent statements inadmissible. Furthermore, it circumvents the established legal process for obtaining evidence, undermining the rule of law. Another incorrect approach is to immediately conduct a search of the premises without a warrant, based solely on the agent's suspicion or the individual's statements. This directly violates the Fourth Amendment, which requires probable cause and a warrant for searches of private residences or property, absent exigent circumstances. Such an action could lead to the suppression of all evidence found, jeopardizing the entire investigation and exposing the agent and DHS to liability. A third incorrect approach is to dismiss the individual's statements as unreliable and abandon the investigation without further legal consultation or action. While the statements may be questionable, they could still form part of the basis for probable cause if corroborated. Abandoning the investigation prematurely, without exploring lawful avenues to gather further evidence or clarify the situation, fails to uphold the investigative responsibilities of a DHS OIG special agent. Professional reasoning. Special agents must operate within a framework of legal and ethical guidelines. When faced with a situation where an individual makes statements that suggest potential evidence of a crime, but the legality of further action is uncertain, the professional decision-making process involves 1. Immediately assessing the situation for any exigent circumstances that might permit immediate action, e.g., imminent destruction of evidence. 2. If no exigent circumstances exist, ceasing any potentially rights-violating actions, like continued interrogation without proper advisements or searches without a warrant. 3. Consulting with legal counsel or a supervisor to understand the applicable laws and departmental policies. 4. Proceeding only after receiving clear guidance and ensuring all actions are legally sound and ethically defensible. This systematic approach ensures the integrity of investigations and protects individual rights. Question 4. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential for unauthorized access to sensitive personally identifiable information, PI, stored within a U.S. Department of Homeland Security, DHS, component's internal database. Considering the U.S. federal regulatory framework and DHS policy, which of the following actions best represents a compliant and ethical response for a DHS OIG special agent? Option A. Rely on informal intelligence gathered from unverified sources to infer the extent of the potential compromise and take limited, ad hoc measures to secure the data without formal documentation. Option B. Conduct a targeted audit of access logs and user activity within the database, focusing on specific user accounts and timeframes identified as high risk in the assessment, while ensuring all data access is logged and justified according to the Privacy Act of 1974 and DHS data handling directives. Option C. Request immediate access to all PII within the database from the system administrator for a general review, citing national security concerns without detailing the specific nature of the suspected compromise. Option D. Initiate a broad, system-wide data extraction of all PII from the database to conduct a comprehensive forensic analysis for any signs of compromise, without specific authorization for individual data access. Correct answer is B. Conduct a targeted audit of access logs and user activity within the database, focusing on specific user accounts and timeframes identified as high risk in the assessment, while ensuring all data access is logged and justified according to the Privacy Act of 1974 and DHS data handling directives. Explanation. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential vulnerability in the data handling protocols of a Department of Homeland Security, DHS, component agency operating within the United States. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an agent to balance the imperative of national security with the legal and ethical obligations to protect sensitive personal information, as mandated by U.S. federal law and DHS policy. The agent must exercise careful judgment to ensure that any investigative actions do not infringe upon individual privacy rights or exceed statutory authority. The best professional approach involves a thorough, documented risk assessment that identifies specific data types, potential threats, and existing safeguards. This assessment should then inform the development of a targeted data collection plan that adheres strictly to the Privacy Act of 1974 and relevant DHS directives on data minimization and lawful access. This approach is correct because it prioritizes a lawful, privacy-conscious, and proportionate response to identified risks. It ensures that data collection is necessary, relevant, and limited to what is required for the authorized purpose, thereby upholding both national security objectives and individual privacy rights. An incorrect approach would be to initiate broad, unfocused data sweeps based on generalized suspicions without a specific, articulable basis. This fails to comply with the Privacy Act's requirements for lawful collection and limits on disclosure, potentially leading to the unauthorized access or dissemination of sensitive personal information. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal information gathering without proper authorization or documentation, which bypasses established oversight mechanisms and can lead to the use of unreliable or illegally obtained information, violating DHS policy and potentially U.S. law. Finally, an approach that prioritizes expediency over legal compliance, such as disregarding established data handling procedures to expedite an investigation, is professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a disregard for the rule of law and the protection of civil liberties, which are fundamental tenets of DHS operations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the legal and policy landscape governing data collection and privacy. This involves consulting relevant statutes, regulations, and internal DHS guidance. The framework should then necessitate a structured risk assessment process, followed by the development of a specific, authorized plan that outlines the scope, purpose, and limitations of any data collection. Continuous oversight and adherence to established protocols are crucial throughout the investigative process to ensure ongoing compliance and mitigate potential legal or ethical breaches. Question 5. Strategic planning requires a DHS OIG special agent in New York to assess a credible, albeit anonymously sourced, intelligence report indicating a potential insider threat within a federal agency that could compromise sensitive national security data. The intelligence was obtained through an unauthorized leak. What is the most appropriate course of action for the special agent to take to investigate this threat while adhering to federal regulations and ethical standards? Option A. Initiate a formal, interagency request through established channels for any information pertaining to the alleged insider threat, specifying the need for data relevant to the reported compromise, and await authorized access. Option B. Disregard the intelligence report entirely due to its unauthorized acquisition, assuming it is unreliable and not worth pursuing. Option C. Share the anonymously sourced, leaked intelligence with trusted external law enforcement partners to leverage their resources in assessing the threat. Option D. Immediately access the leaked intelligence data to assess its veracity and the scope of the threat, then proceed with an investigation based on that information. The correct answer is A. Initiate a formal, interagency request through established channels for any information pertaining to the alleged insider threat, specifying the need for data relevant to the reported compromise, and await authorized access. Explanation: strategic planning requires a comprehensive understanding of the operational environment and potential threats. For a Department of Homeland Security (DHS) OIG special agent, this involves anticipating how adversaries might exploit vulnerabilities within federal agencies or critical infrastructure. The challenge in this scenario lies in balancing the need for proactive intelligence gathering with the strict legal and ethical boundaries governing investigations, particularly concerning the use of sensitive information obtained through unauthorized means. A special agent must navigate the complexities of interagency cooperation, evidence handling, and the potential for information to be compromised or misused, all while adhering to the DHS OIG's mission to detect and prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. The best approach involves a methodical and legally sound process that prioritizes the integrity of the investigation and the protection of sensitive information. This includes initiating a formal request through established interagency channels for information relevant to a credible threat, ensuring that all data acquisition complies with federal statutes and DHS policies. Such a request would trigger a review process to determine the legality and necessity of accessing the information, thereby safeguarding against unauthorized disclosure and potential misuse. This method upholds the principles of due process, evidence admissibility, and the responsible handling of classified or sensitive data, aligning with the Inspector General Act and relevant DHS directives on information security and investigative procedures. An approach that involves directly accessing the compromised data without proper authorization or a formal request is professionally unacceptable. This bypasses established protocols designed to prevent unauthorized access and potential breaches of sensitive information. It risks compromising ongoing investigations, violating privacy rights, and undermining the credibility of the OIG. Furthermore, using information obtained through such means could render it inadmissible in any subsequent legal proceedings, hindering the OIG's ability to hold individuals or entities accountable for wrongdoing. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to ignore the intelligence due to the unauthorized nature of its acquisition. While the source may be questionable, the potential threat to national security or public safety warrants careful consideration. Dismissing it outright without any attempt to verify or obtain the information through legitimate channels could lead to a failure to prevent significant harm, which is contrary to the core mission of the OIG. Finally, an approach that involves immediately disseminating the compromised information to external partners without internal review and authorization is also flawed. This premature disclosure could alert adversaries, compromise the OIG's investigative capabilities, and violate regulations concerning the handling of sensitive or classified information. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance, ethical conduct, and operational effectiveness. This involves a risk-based assessment where potential threats are evaluated against the legal and procedural constraints governing investigative actions. When faced with information obtained through questionable means, the process should involve consulting with legal counsel, adhering to established protocols for information sharing and acquisition, and prioritizing the integrity of evidence and the protection of sensitive data. Question 6. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential compromise of sensitive personally identifiable information, PI, within a Department of Homeland Security, DHS, component agency operating in the United States. As a DHS OIG special agent, what is the most appropriate initial course of action to address this potential vulnerability? Option A. Gather informal intelligence from agency personnel through casual conversations to gauge the severity of the issue before reporting it through official channels. Option B. Immediately begin covert monitoring of the agency's internal network traffic to identify the source of the potential compromise, without prior notification to supervisors or legal counsel. Option C. Forward the preliminary risk assessment findings directly to the FBI for their immediate investigation, assuming the matter falls outside the OIG's purview. Option D. Initiate a formal, documented inquiry to assess the nature and extent of the PII compromise, consulting with the OIG's legal counsel and relevant DHS data privacy officials to determine the appropriate investigative scope and legal authorities. The correct answer is D. Initiate a formal, documented inquiry to assess the nature and extent of the PII compromise, consulting with the OIG's legal counsel and relevant DHS data privacy officials to determine the appropriate investigative scope and legal authorities. Explanation. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential vulnerability in the data handling protocols of a Department of Homeland Security, DHS, component agency operating within the United States. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires special agents to balance the imperative of national security with the strict adherence to legal and ethical standards governing data privacy and access. Missteps can lead to compromised investigations, legal challenges, and erosion of public trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that investigative actions are both effective and lawful. The best professional practice involves a thorough and documented review of the identified vulnerability by the appropriate DHS OIG oversight body, which would then determine the scope and legality of any investigative actions. This approach ensures that all actions are authorized, proportionate, and comply with federal statutes such as the Privacy Act of 1974 and relevant DHS directives on data security and access. It prioritizes due process and legal compliance, safeguarding against overreach and ensuring that any data collection or analysis is conducted within established legal boundaries. An incorrect approach would be to immediately initiate covert surveillance or data acquisition without prior authorization or a clear legal basis. This bypasses necessary oversight and legal review, potentially violating individuals' privacy rights and exceeding the OIG's statutory authority. Such actions could be deemed unlawful, rendering any gathered evidence inadmissible and exposing the OIG to legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on informal information gathering or anecdotal evidence to address the vulnerability without a structured investigative plan. This lacks the rigor required for official investigations and may not uncover the full scope of the issue or its root causes. It also fails to establish a clear chain of custody or legal justification for any subsequent actions. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to escalate the issue to external agencies without first exhausting internal DHS OIG investigative and reporting mechanisms. While interagency cooperation is important, premature external reporting without proper internal assessment and authorization can undermine the OIG's investigative integrity and mandate. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the OIG's statutory authority and the legal landscape governing data access and privacy in the United States. This involves consulting relevant statutes, regulations, and internal policies. When a potential vulnerability is identified, the process should involve documenting the concern, assessing its potential impact, and then seeking appropriate legal and supervisory approval for any investigative steps. This structured approach ensures that actions are legally sound, ethically defensible, and aligned with the OIG's mission to promote economy, efficiency, and integrity within DHS. Question 7. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential data exfiltration vector within a DHS component agency's network infrastructure in Texas. As a special agent with the DHS OIG, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action to address this identified vulnerability? Option A. Contact a trusted external cybersecurity consultant to assess and remediate the vulnerability. Option B. Document the vulnerability internally and monitor network traffic for signs of exploitation without reporting it to higher authorities. Option C. Attempt to independently patch the vulnerability using available technical knowledge to prevent immediate data loss. Option D. Immediately report the identified vulnerability through official DHS OIG reporting channels, initiate a formal risk assessment, and consult with DHS legal and cybersecurity experts to develop a mitigation strategy. Correct answer is D. Immediately report the identified vulnerability through official DHS OIG reporting channels, initiate a formal risk assessment, and consult with DHS legal and cybersecurity experts to develop a mitigation strategy. Explanation. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential vulnerability in the data handling protocols of a Department of Homeland Security, DHS, component agency operating within the United States. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires special agents to balance the imperative of national security with the strict adherence to legal and ethical standards governing the collection, storage, and dissemination of sensitive information. Missteps can lead to compromised investigations, legal repercussions, and erosion of public trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that investigative actions are both effective and lawful. The best professional practice involves a systematic and documented approach to risk mitigation, prioritizing the integrity of the investigation and the protection of sensitive data. This includes immediately reporting the identified vulnerability through established internal channels, initiating a formal risk assessment to quantify the potential impact, and developing a mitigation plan in consultation with relevant legal and technical experts within DHS. This approach is correct because it aligns with DHS directives on information security, the Privacy Act of 1974, and the DHS OIG's mandate to ensure accountability and integrity within the department. It ensures that potential risks are addressed proactively, transparently, and in accordance with established protocols, thereby safeguarding both national security interests and individual privacy rights. An incorrect approach would be to attempt to directly rectify the vulnerability without proper authorization or documentation. This bypasses established reporting structures, potentially leading to further security breaches or the accidental destruction of critical evidence. It also fails to involve the necessary subject matter experts, increasing the likelihood of an ineffective or even detrimental solution. Such an action would violate DHS policies on information system security and could be construed as unauthorized access or tampering with sensitive data. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the identified vulnerability due to perceived operational pressures or a belief that it is minor. This demonstrates a failure to adhere to the principle of due diligence and proactive risk management. It leaves the agency and its data exposed to potential exploitation, which could have severe national security implications. This inaction directly contravenes the OIG's oversight responsibilities and the agency's obligation to maintain robust security measures. A further incorrect approach involves sharing the details of the vulnerability with external parties outside of authorized channels, even if with good intentions. This constitutes an unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information, potentially compromising ongoing investigations and creating a significant security risk. It violates the principles of confidentiality and information security that are paramount for DHS operations and could lead to severe disciplinary action and legal consequences. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes adherence to established protocols, thorough documentation, and consultation with appropriate authorities. When a potential vulnerability is identified, the immediate steps should be to secure the immediate area or data if possible without compromising evidence, report the finding through official channels, and await guidance from supervisors and relevant expert offices, e.g., IT security legal counsel. This ensures that actions taken are lawful, effective, and aligned with the overarching mission and regulatory requirements. Question 8. Operational review demonstrates a pattern of suspicious financial transactions by a DHS contractor that may indicate procurement fraud. An agent observes this pattern and has gathered initial observations. Which of the following actions best upholds the integrity of the investigative process and departmental regulations in the U.S. Department of Homeland Security? Option A. Discuss the suspicions and observations with colleagues in other departments before formally reporting to the DHS Office of Inspector General. Option B. Directly confront the contractor to question them about the suspicious transactions before reporting to the DHS Office of Inspector General. Option C. Immediately document all observations and evidence, and formally report the suspected fraud through established internal reporting channels to the DHS Office of Inspector General for investigation. Option D. Continue to gather additional evidence independently for an extended period before reporting the suspicions to the DHS Office of Inspector General. Correct answer is C. Immediately document all observations and evidence, and formally report the suspected fraud through established internal reporting channels to the DHS Office of Inspector General for investigation. Explanation. Operational review demonstrates a need to evaluate the effectiveness of internal controls designed to prevent and detect fraud within the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, DHS. A specific scenario involves an agent who has observed a pattern of suspicious financial transactions linked to a contractor that could indicate procurement fraud. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the agent's duty to investigate potential criminal activity with the need to adhere to established investigative protocols and maintain the integrity of evidence. The agent must act decisively without compromising due process or departmental policy. The best professional practice in this situation is to immediately document all observations and evidence, and then formally report the suspected fraud through the established internal reporting channels to the DHS Office of Inspector General OIG for investigation. This approach is correct because it aligns with the DHS OIG's mandate to investigate fraud, waste, and abuse within the department. Prompt and formal reporting ensures that the allegations are handled by the appropriate investigative body, which possesses the necessary authority and expertise to conduct a thorough and lawful inquiry. This also preserves the chain of custody for any evidence gathered and ensures that the investigation proceeds in accordance with federal law and departmental regulations, such as those outlined in DHS Directive 102-01. Office of Inspector General. An incorrect approach would be to directly confront the contractor without prior consultation with the OIG. This is professionally unacceptable because it could alert the potential perpetrators, allowing them to destroy evidence, obstruct the investigation, or even retaliate against the agent. It bypasses the established investigative framework and could jeopardize the integrity of any subsequent investigation. Another incorrect approach is to delay reporting the suspicions due to a desire to gather more definitive proof independently. This is professionally unacceptable as it can lead to the loss of critical evidence and allows potential criminal activity to continue unchecked. The OIG is equipped to gather evidence through legal means, and delaying notification hinders their ability to do so effectively. Furthermore, it could be construed as a dereliction of duty. Finally, An incorrect approach would be to discuss the suspicions with colleagues outside of the formal reporting structure before officially notifying the OIG. This is professionally unacceptable, as it risks compromising the confidentiality of a potential investigation, could lead to the spread of unsubstantiated rumors, and undermines the formal investigative process. Information related to potential fraud should only be shared through authorized channels to maintain the integrity and security of the investigation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established protocols and reporting structures when encountering potential criminal activity. This involves recognizing suspicious indicators, meticulously documenting observations, and immediately initiating the formal reporting process to the designated oversight body, in this case, the DHS OIG. This ensures that investigations are conducted legally, ethically, and effectively, protecting both departmental resources and the integrity of the investigative process. Question 9. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential vulnerability in the supply chain for sensitive technology components destined for use by the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, in California. Which of the following actions represents the most effective and compliant approach for a DHS OIG special agent to take in this situation? Option A. Accept the supplier's self-attestation of compliance with all relevant security and operational standards without further independent verification, given the urgency of the component acquisition. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive vetting process for the supplier, including background checks, verification of certifications, and assessment of their security protocols and financial stability, in accordance with federal acquisition regulations and DHS directives. Option C. Prioritize the supplier offering the lowest bid price for the sensitive technology components, assuming that cost-effectiveness is the primary indicator of a reliable partner. Option D. Expedite the vetting process to meet the immediate operational needs of the DHS, bypassing some standard due diligence steps to ensure timely delivery. The correct answer is B. Initiate a comprehensive vetting process for the supplier, including background checks, verification of certifications, and assessment of their security protocols and financial stability, in accordance with federal acquisition regulations and DHS directives. Explanation. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential vulnerability in the supply chain for sensitive technology components destined for use by the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, in California. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires special agents to balance national security imperatives with the need for due diligence and adherence to established procurement regulations. Missteps could lead to compromised technology, financial waste, or legal repercussions for the government and its contractors. Careful judgment is required to identify and mitigate risks without unduly impeding legitimate operations. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive risk-based approach to vetting potential suppliers. This entails conducting thorough background checks, verifying certifications, and assessing the supplier's security protocols and financial stability. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the principles of responsible procurement and risk management mandated by federal regulations, such as those found in the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR, and DHS-specific acquisition policies. These regulations emphasize a proactive stance in identifying and mitigating risks associated with government contracts, particularly when dealing with sensitive technologies. By prioritizing a multifaceted vetting process, agents ensure that only trustworthy and capable entities are engaged, thereby safeguarding national security interests and taxpayer funds. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the supplier's self-attestation of compliance without independent verification. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses critical due diligence steps, leaving the DHS vulnerable to undisclosed risks. Regulatory frameworks require independent verification of claims and certifications to ensure accuracy and prevent fraud or security breaches. Another incorrect approach would be to expedite the vetting process due to perceived urgency without a formal risk-based justification. This is professionally unacceptable as it undermines the integrity of the procurement process and can lead to overlooking significant risks that a more deliberate assessment would uncover. While efficiency is important, it must not come at the expense of thoroughness and compliance with established procedures designed to protect national security. A further incorrect approach would be to focus exclusively on the lowest bid price without adequately considering the supplier's security posture and reliability. This is professionally unacceptable because it prioritizes cost over security and operational integrity, which are paramount in the context of DHS operations. Federal procurement regulations often include provisions that allow for the rejection of bids that, while low in price, pose unacceptable risks to national security or program success. The professional reasoning framework for such situations involves a systematic evaluation of potential threats and vulnerabilities, followed by the implementation of appropriate mitigation strategies. This includes understanding the regulatory landscape, applying risk assessment methodologies, and exercising sound judgment to make informed decisions that uphold both security and compliance. Agents should always document their decision-making process thoroughly, demonstrating how their actions align with established policies and best practices. Question 10. The assessment process reveals that a special agent in the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, Office of Inspector General OIG, in California requires specialized audio surveillance equipment for an ongoing investigation. The estimated cost of the equipment is $15,000. The agent has identified a vendor known for high-quality equipment, and the quoted price is within the estimated budget. The agent is considering proceeding with this vendor directly to expedite the acquisition and avoid delays in the investigation. What is the most appropriate course of action regarding the procurement of this equipment, considering the relevant DHS OIG guidelines and federal acquisition regulations? Option A. Solicit competitive bids from at least 3 approved vendors, document the bidding process, and select the vendor offering the best value, ensuring compliance with all federal acquisition regulations and DHS OIG procurement policies. Option B. Delay the procurement until a more thorough market analysis can be conducted, even if it means using less effective existing equipment in the interim. Option C. Proceed with the purchase from the preferred vendor and seek retroactive approval for the expenditure, justifying it as an urgent operational necessity. Option D. Purchase the equipment directly from the known vendor, as their price is within budget and the agent is familiar with their products, to expedite the investigation. The correct answer is A. Solicit competitive bids from at least 3 approved vendors, document the bidding process, and select the vendor offering the best value, ensuring compliance with all federal acquisition regulations and DHS OIG procurement policies. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent tension between operational efficiency and the meticulous adherence to Department of Homeland Security, DHS, OIG investigative protocols, particularly concerning the financial implications of evidence handling and storage. Special agents are tasked with not only securing evidence, but also managing the associated costs responsibly, which requires a nuanced understanding of budgetary constraints and procurement regulations. Careful judgment is required to balance the need for effective investigative tools with fiscal prudence, ensuring that resources are utilized in a manner that maximizes investigative impact without unnecessary expenditure. The correct approach involves a proactive and compliant procurement strategy. This entails thoroughly researching and documenting the necessity for specialized equipment, obtaining multiple competitive bids from approved vendors, and ensuring all purchases align with DHS OIG procurement policies and federal acquisition regulations. Specifically, this approach prioritizes obtaining the most cost-effective solution through a transparent and documented bidding process, thereby demonstrating fiscal responsibility and adherence to regulatory requirements for the acquisition of investigative assets. This aligns with the principles of efficient resource management and accountability mandated by DHS OIG directives and federal procurement laws, which emphasize obtaining goods and services at fair and reasonable prices through competitive means. An incorrect approach would be to bypass the competitive bidding process by unilaterally selecting a vendor based on perceived familiarity or convenience, even if the cost appears reasonable at first glance. This failure to solicit competitive bids violates federal acquisition regulations and DHS OIG procurement policies, which are designed to prevent favoritism, ensure fair market pricing, and promote transparency. Another incorrect approach involves delaying the procurement process due to indecision or a lack of understanding of the required procedures, leading to the use of suboptimal or outdated equipment, which can compromise the integrity of evidence or the effectiveness of an investigation. This demonstrates a lack of proactive case management and adherence to operational timelines. Finally, an approach that involves exceeding the allocated budget without proper justification or approval, even if the equipment is deemed essential, represents a significant ethical and regulatory breach, undermining financial oversight and accountability. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the investigative need and the associated budgetary parameters. This should be followed by a thorough review of relevant DHS OIG policies and federal acquisition regulations. The next step involves actively engaging with procurement specialists to identify approved vendors and initiate a competitive bidding process. Documentation at each stage is crucial to ensure transparency and accountability. If unforeseen circumstances arise that necessitate a deviation from the standard process or an increase in budget, a formal justification and approval process must be followed. Question 11. Process analysis reveals that a U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) special agent operating near a known smuggling corridor in Arizona observes a vehicle exhibiting unusual driving patterns and occupants appearing to make furtive movements. The agent has a hunch that the vehicle may be involved in illicit activity, but lacks concrete evidence of a specific crime. Considering the operational environment and the potential for national security threats, which of the following represents the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for the special agent? Option A. Meticulously document all observed activities and information, cross-reference it with existing intelligence, and submit a comprehensive report to the appropriate DHS supervisory personnel and legal counsel for review and guidance. Option B. Share the preliminary suspicions and observations with local law enforcement officers not directly involved in the DHS investigation, without formal interagency notification or authorization. Option C. Immediately initiate a physical stop and search of the vehicle based solely on the agent's suspicion of illicit activity. Option D. Dismiss the observed activity as insignificant and take no further action, assuming it is unrelated to national security. The correct answer is A. Meticulously document all observed activities and information, cross-reference it with existing intelligence, and submit a comprehensive report to the appropriate DHS supervisory personnel and legal counsel for review and guidance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for swift action to protect national security and the imperative to adhere to established investigative protocols and legal boundaries. Special agents must exercise sound judgment to balance these competing demands, ensuring that their actions are both effective and lawful, thereby maintaining the integrity of the investigation and the Department of Homeland Security's (DHS) reputation. The potential for overreach or insufficient action necessitates a meticulous approach to evidence gathering and operational planning. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting all observed activities and information, cross-referencing it with existing intelligence, and then submitting a comprehensive report to the appropriate DHS supervisory personnel and legal counsel for review and guidance. This approach is correct because it adheres strictly to DHS policy and federal law, which mandate that all investigative actions, particularly those involving potential surveillance or interdiction, must be authorized and conducted within legal parameters. By seeking supervisory and legal review, the agent ensures that any subsequent actions are based on probable cause, are legally permissible, and align with the overall investigative strategy, thereby safeguarding the investigation from legal challenges and upholding due process. This process respects the chain of command and the legal framework governing DHS operations in the United States. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately initiating a physical stop and search of the vehicle based solely on the agent's suspicion, without further corroboration or authorization. This fails to meet the legal standard of reasonable suspicion or probable cause required for such an action under U.S. law, potentially leading to a violation of the Fourth Amendment and rendering any seized evidence inadmissible. It bypasses necessary supervisory and legal oversight, demonstrating a disregard for established protocols. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the observed activity as insignificant and take no further action, despite the potential national security implications. This failure to investigate and report could result in a missed opportunity to disrupt a threat, thereby compromising the mission of DHS and potentially endangering public safety. It represents a dereliction of duty by not pursuing a credible lead. A third incorrect approach is to share the preliminary suspicions and observations with external, unauthorized individuals or agencies without proper clearance. This action violates DHS information security policies and could compromise the ongoing investigation, alert the subjects of the investigation, and potentially lead to the dissemination of unverified or sensitive intelligence, undermining national security. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must employ a structured decision-making process that prioritizes legal compliance, adherence to policy, and effective risk management. This involves a continuous cycle of observation, assessment, consultation, and action. When faced with ambiguous or potentially high-stakes situations, the agent should first gather all available information, assess the immediate threat level, and then consult internal policies and legal advisors to determine the appropriate course of action. Documentation at every stage is crucial for accountability and legal defensibility. The principle of innocent until proven guilty and the protection of civil liberties must always be balanced with the mandate to protect national security. Question 12. Market research demonstrates that special agents of the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, in the state of California may encounter digital devices during investigations. Considering the strict regulatory framework governing evidence handling in California and federal DHS directives, which of the following actions best upholds the integrity of the investigation and legal admissibility of evidence? Option A. Share the contents of the digital device with other agents and personnel not directly involved in the forensic analysis, assuming broader awareness will aid the investigation. Option B. Access the contents of the digital device immediately to search for relevant information, believing that speed is paramount in gathering intelligence. Option C. Immediately secure the digital device in a manner that preserves its original state. Meticulously document its discovery and handling, and then submit it to the appropriate forensic unit for analysis. Option D. Leave the digital device unsecured at the scene while attending to other immediate investigative tasks, planning to retrieve it later. The correct answer is C. Immediately secure the digital device in a manner that preserves its original state, meticulously document its discovery and handling, and then submit it to the appropriate forensic unit for analysis. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for swift information gathering during an investigation and the strict adherence to established protocols for evidence handling and chain of custody. Special agents must exercise careful judgment to balance operational urgency with legal and ethical imperatives, ensuring that investigative actions do not compromise the integrity of potential evidence or violate the rights of individuals. The potential for misinterpretation of evidence or unauthorized disclosure carries significant consequences for the investigation and the Department of Homeland Security's, DHS, credibility. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately securing the digital device in a manner that preserves its original state, documenting its discovery and handling meticulously, and then submitting it to the appropriate forensic unit for analysis. This approach is correct because it aligns with established DHS policies and federal guidelines concerning digital evidence. Specifically, it adheres to the principles of chain of custody, which mandate that evidence be handled in a way that maintains its integrity from the point of collection to its presentation in court. This ensures that the data on the device is admissible and reliable, preventing any claims of tampering or alteration. It also respects the privacy and legal rights of the individual by ensuring that access to the data is conducted by authorized personnel under controlled conditions. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately accessing the contents of the digital device to search for relevant information without following proper forensic procedures. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the critical chain of custody protocols. Unauthorized access can alter the digital footprint of the device, potentially destroying exculpatory or inculpatory evidence, and may violate privacy laws and DHS directives on handling digital evidence. Such actions could render any discovered information inadmissible in legal proceedings and lead to disciplinary action. Another incorrect approach is to leave the digital device unsecured at the scene, intending to retrieve it later after completing other immediate tasks. This is professionally unacceptable, as it creates a significant risk of evidence tampering, loss, or unauthorized access by third parties. The integrity of the investigation is compromised when evidence is not immediately secured and documented according to established protocols. This failure to secure evidence promptly violates fundamental investigative principles and DHS guidelines designed to maintain the reliability of evidence. A third incorrect approach is to share the contents of the digital device with other agents or personnel not directly involved in the forensic analysis or authorized to receive such information, even if the device has not yet been formally processed. This is professionally unacceptable due to the severe risk of unauthorized disclosure and breach of privacy. Information obtained from digital devices, especially during an ongoing investigation, is often sensitive and subject to strict confidentiality requirements. Disseminating this information prematurely can jeopardize the investigation, compromise the safety of individuals, and violate privacy regulations and DHS policies. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established protocols and legal mandates. When encountering potential evidence, the immediate step should be to secure, document, and preserve. This involves understanding and applying the principles of chain of custody for all types of evidence, including digital. If unsure about the proper procedure, consulting with supervisors or the appropriate forensic unit is paramount. The urgency of an investigation should never supersede the integrity of the evidence and the legal rights of individuals. A systematic approach, grounded in policy and legal precedent, ensures that investigations are conducted ethically and effectively, leading to reliable outcomes. Question 13. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential for unauthorized access to sensitive traveler information collected by a Department of Homeland Security, DHS, component agency operating within the United States, due to a perceived gap in the agency's data retention and anonymization protocols. Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action for a special agent to recommend? Option A. Recommend the implementation of overly broad access restrictions to all traveler data, limiting access to only a handful of senior officials, even if it hinders routine investigative activities. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive review of existing data retention and anonymization policies, comparing them against the Privacy Act of 1974 and relevant DHS directives, and recommend specific technical and procedural enhancements to mitigate identified risks. Option C. Advise the agency to immediately cease all collection of sensitive traveler information until a complete overhaul of data handling systems can be completed, regardless of operational impact. Option D. Suggest that the agency rely on informal assurances from IT personnel that the data is adequately protected, and to monitor for any reported breaches without formal policy adjustments. The correct answer is B. Initiate a comprehensive review of existing data retention and anonymization policies, comparing them against the Privacy Act of 1974 and relevant DHS directives, and recommend specific technical and procedural enhancements to mitigate identified risks. Explanation. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential vulnerability in the data handling protocols of a Department of Homeland Security, DHS, component agency operating within the United States. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires special agents to balance the imperative of national security with the strict adherence to legal and ethical standards governing the collection, storage, and dissemination of sensitive information. The potential for misuse or unauthorized access to data, coupled with the need to maintain public trust, necessitates a rigorous and principled approach. The best professional practice involves a proactive and legally compliant data management strategy. This approach prioritizes the identification and mitigation of risks through established DHS policies and relevant federal statutes, such as the Privacy Act of 1974 and the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, FISMA. It emphasizes the principle of least privilege, ensuring that access to data is granted only to those with a legitimate need to know and for authorized purposes. Furthermore, it mandates robust security controls, regular audits, and comprehensive training for personnel handling sensitive information. This aligns with the DHS OIG's mandate to ensure the integrity and effectiveness of DHS operations and to protect national security information. An incorrect approach would be to overlook the identified vulnerability due to perceived operational expediency. This failure to address a known risk directly contravenes the principles of due diligence and responsible data stewardship mandated by federal law and DHS policy. It creates an unacceptable security gap, increasing the likelihood of data breaches, unauthorized disclosure, and potential compromise of ongoing investigations or national security operations. Such an oversight could lead to severe legal repercussions, damage to the agency's reputation, and erosion of public confidence. Another incorrect approach would be to implement overly restrictive data access policies that impede legitimate operational requirements. While security is paramount, hindering essential information sharing among authorized personnel can cripple an agency's ability to perform its mission effectively. This approach fails to strike the necessary balance between security and operational necessity, potentially leading to inefficiencies and missed opportunities in critical national security efforts. It demonstrates a lack of nuanced understanding of risk management principles. A final incorrect approach would be to rely solely on anecdotal evidence or informal assurances regarding data security, without conducting a formal risk assessment or implementing documented controls. This ad hoc method is inherently unreliable and fails to meet the stringent requirements for safeguarding sensitive government information. It ignores established best practices and regulatory mandates, leaving the agency exposed to significant risks and potential noncompliance. The professional reasoning process for special agents in such situations should involve a systematic evaluation of identified risks against established legal frameworks and DHS directives. This includes consulting relevant policies, seeking guidance from legal counsel or internal compliance officers when necessary, and prioritizing actions that demonstrably reduce risk while enabling mission accomplishment. A commitment to continuous improvement and adherence to the highest ethical standards are fundamental to effective risk management and maintaining the integrity of DHS operations. Question 14. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential for unauthorized access to sensitive traveler information collected by a Department of Homeland Security, DHS, component agency operating within the United States. Considering the legal and regulatory framework governing DHS operations, which of the following actions best addresses this identified risk? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive data inventory and classification. Identify specific threat vectors and vulnerabilities, and implement targeted security controls and access restrictions commensurate with the data's sensitivity and the identified risks, ensuring all actions are documented and compliant with DHS directives and federal law. Option B. Immediately implement a complete moratorium on all access to the sensitive traveler information until a new, highly restrictive security protocol can be developed and deployed, regardless of operational impact. Option C. Rely on the existing security measures, assuming they are sufficient, and only investigate potential breaches if they are reported by external sources. Option D. Authorize all special agents with a need to access the information to create their own ad hoc security protocols to protect the data they handle, based on their individual judgment. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive data inventory and classification, identify specific threat vectors and vulnerabilities, and implement targeted security controls and access restrictions commensurate with the data's sensitivity and the identified risks, ensuring all actions are documented and compliant with DHS directives and federal law. Explanation. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential vulnerability in the data handling protocols of a Department of Homeland Security, DHS, component agency operating within the United States. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires special agents to balance the imperative of national security with the strict adherence to legal and ethical standards governing the collection, storage, and dissemination of sensitive information. Missteps can lead to compromised investigations, legal challenges, and erosion of public trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that investigative actions are both effective and lawful. The best professional practice involves a thorough, documented risk assessment that identifies specific data types, potential threats, and existing controls, followed by the implementation of proportionate mitigation strategies. This approach ensures that any data handling practices are compliant with relevant DHS directives. Federal statutes such as the Privacy Act of 1974 and the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. It prioritizes a systematic, evidence-based approach to security, ensuring that resources are allocated effectively to address the most significant risks while maintaining operational integrity. An incorrect approach would be to implement broad, sweeping data access restrictions without a clear understanding of the specific risks or operational needs. This fails to acknowledge that not all data carries the same level of risk and can hinder legitimate investigative activities, potentially impacting national security. It also overlooks the requirement for a tailored, risk-based approach mandated by federal information security policies. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on anecdotal evidence or past experiences to justify data security measures. While experience is valuable, it does not substitute for a formal, documented risk assessment process. This can lead to the misallocation of resources, overlooking novel threats, and failing to meet the rigorous standards of legal and regulatory compliance. It also lacks the objective basis required for accountability and oversight. A further incorrect approach would be to bypass established data handling protocols in the name of expediency, even if the intention is to protect national security. This undermines the rule of law and the established framework designed to safeguard sensitive information and individual privacy. Such actions, even with good intentions, can have severe legal and ethical repercussions, including the inadmissibility of evidence and disciplinary action. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly define the scope of the risk assessment, identifying the data, systems, and potential threats. Second, gather and analyze relevant information, consulting with subject matter experts and reviewing existing policies and regulations. Third, develop and document mitigation strategies that are proportionate to the identified risks and compliant with all applicable laws and directives. Fourth, implement and monitor these strategies, ensuring continuous improvement and adaptation to evolving threats. Finally, maintain clear and accurate records of all assessments and actions taken for accountability and oversight. Question 15. The control framework reveals that a special agent with the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, in California is investigating a suspected scheme involving the illicit transfer of funds across state lines, potentially violating federal statutes. The investigation has identified a specific financial institution where the suspect is believed to hold accounts and conduct transactions related to the alleged criminal activity. What is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for the special agent to pursue to obtain the suspect's financial records from this institution? Option A. Rely on the Patriot Act provisions to immediately access the suspect's financial records without a warrant, given the suspected connection to interstate financial crimes. Option B. Initiate a parallel administrative inquiry through DHS channels to compel the financial institution to provide the suspect's financial records, bypassing the need for judicial authorization. Option C. Prepare and present a sworn affidavit to a federal magistrate judge, detailing the probable cause for believing criminal activity has occurred and requesting a search warrant for the suspect's financial records held by the institution. Option D. Directly contact the financial institution and request voluntary disclosure of the suspect's account information and transaction history, explaining the nature of the ongoing investigation. Correct answer is C. Prepare and present a sworn affidavit to a federal magistrate judge, detailing the probable cause for believing criminal activity has occurred and requesting a search warrant for the suspect's financial records held by the institution. Explanation. The control framework reveals a critical juncture in the investigation of potential financial crimes within the United States. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires special agents to balance the imperative of thorough evidence collection with the strict legal boundaries governing their authority, particularly concerning the privacy rights of individuals and entities under investigation. Missteps can lead to inadmissible evidence, compromised investigations, and damage to the Department of Homeland Security's DHS credibility. The best professional practice involves a meticulous adherence to established legal protocols and the principle of obtaining necessary judicial authorization before accessing sensitive information. This approach prioritizes lawful evidence gathering, ensuring that any information obtained is admissible in court and respects the constitutional rights of those being investigated. Specifically, it mandates that agents must secure a warrant based on probable cause from a neutral and detached magistrate before conducting searches or seizures of private data, such as financial records held by a third-party financial institution. This aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and established case law, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. An incorrect approach would be to directly request financial records from a bank without a warrant, relying on the bank's potential willingness to cooperate or a misunderstanding of the scope of their authority. This fails to respect the privacy protections afforded by law and could be construed as an unlawful search. Another incorrect approach would be to delay the investigation significantly by attempting to gather information through informal channels or by pursuing less direct, potentially less effective, investigative avenues, thereby risking the destruction of evidence or the escape of perpetrators. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the urgency and the appropriate legal tools available for financial crime investigations. A further incorrect approach would be to assume that because the investigation involves potential federal crimes, all financial data is immediately accessible without specific legal authorization, ignoring the procedural safeguards in place. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the specific legal authority and limitations applicable to the investigation. This involves consulting with legal counsel, understanding the requirements for obtaining warrants, and prioritizing lawful methods of evidence collection. A systematic approach, focusing on probable cause and judicial oversight, ensures that investigations are both effective and legally sound. Question 16. Governance review demonstrates that a Department of Homeland Security, DHS, OIG special agent in California is investigating allegations of fraud within a federally funded program. The agent has gathered preliminary information suggesting a specific individual may possess crucial documents. Considering the strict legal framework governing federal investigations in the United States, which of the following approaches best aligns with established protocols for evidence acquisition? Option A. Conduct covert surveillance of the individual's residence for an extended period to observe document handling without a warrant to gather further circumstantial evidence. Option B. Obtain a judicially authorized search warrant based on probable cause, specifying the documents to be seized and executed in strict accordance with its terms, ensuring all actions are documented. Option C. Approach the individual directly and request access to their personal files, implying that cooperation will lead to a more favorable outcome in the investigation. Option D. Rely on information provided by an anonymous informant without independent verification, and use this information as the sole basis to demand immediate access to the individual's financial records. The correct answer is B. Obtain a judicially authorized search warrant based on probable cause, specifying the documents to be seized and executed in strict accordance with its terms, ensuring all actions are documented. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for timely information gathering and the strict adherence to legal and ethical boundaries governing investigations. Special agents must exercise careful judgment to balance investigative objectives with the rights of individuals and the integrity of the evidence collected. Failure to do so can compromise an investigation, lead to the suppression of evidence, and result in disciplinary action or legal repercussions. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, OIG operates under specific federal statutes and internal policies that dictate permissible investigative techniques. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting all investigative steps and ensuring that any information obtained is acquired through lawful means, respecting all constitutional protections. This approach prioritizes the integrity of the investigation and the admissibility of evidence. Specifically, it requires agents to understand and apply the principles of the Fourth Amendment concerning searches and seizures, and to operate within the scope of their authorized investigative powers as defined by DHS OIG policy and federal law. This ensures that evidence is obtained legally and ethically, thereby strengthening the case and upholding the agency's reputation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying on information obtained through unauthorized surveillance or by exceeding the scope of a warrant. This violates the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures and could lead to the exclusion of critical evidence. It also demonstrates a disregard for established legal procedures and could expose the agent and the agency to civil liability. Another incorrect approach is to coerce or unduly influence a subject into providing information without proper legal counsel or advisement of rights. This can be seen as a violation of due process and could render any statements obtained inadmissible in court. It also reflects a failure to uphold ethical standards of fairness and impartiality in investigations. A third incorrect approach is to fail to properly document the chain of custody for seized evidence or to mishandle sensitive information. This compromises the integrity of the evidence and can raise doubts about its authenticity and reliability, potentially jeopardizing the entire investigation. It also demonstrates a lack of diligence and adherence to established protocols for evidence management. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance, ethical conduct, and procedural integrity. This involves a thorough understanding of applicable laws, regulations, and departmental policies. Before undertaking any investigative action, agents should assess its legality and ethical implications, seeking guidance from supervisors or legal counsel when necessary. A commitment to meticulous documentation and adherence to established protocols ensures that investigations are conducted professionally and effectively, safeguarding both the integrity of the evidence and the rights of all individuals involved. Question 17. During the evaluation of a complex investigation into alleged procurement fraud by a defense contractor operating in California, a DHS OIG special agent discovers that crucial evidence may reside with a state-level investigative agency. What is the most appropriate course of action for the special agent to take to lawfully obtain and utilize this evidence? Option A. Initiate a formal request for information sharing with the California State Agency, referencing any existing memoranda of understanding, MOU, or specific federal statutes that permit such cooperation, and meticulously document all communications and exchanges. Option B. Proceed with obtaining the evidence directly from the contractor, bypassing the California State Agency, based on the premise that the federal investigation supersedes state-level information control. Option C. Immediately share all pertinent investigative findings with the California State Agency, assuming their investigative needs align with federal requirements, and that such disclosure is permissible under general law enforcement cooperation principles. Option D. Halt the federal investigation temporarily to draft and negotiate a new, comprehensive interagency agreement with the California State Agency before any information is exchanged. The correct answer is A. Initiate a formal request for information sharing with the California State Agency, referencing any existing memoranda of understanding MOU or specific federal statutes that permit such cooperation, and meticulously document all communications and exchanges. Explanation. During the evaluation of a sensitive investigation involving potential misuse of federal funds by a contractor operating within the United States, special agents of the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, OIG must navigate complex jurisdictional boundaries and interagency cooperation protocols. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires agents to balance the imperative of thorough investigation with strict adherence to legal mandates, interagency agreements, and the protection of sensitive information. Missteps can lead to compromised evidence, legal challenges, and damage to interagency relationships, ultimately hindering the mission of safeguarding national security and public trust. The best approach involves meticulously documenting all interactions and information exchanges with the relevant state-level investigative bodies in California, ensuring that any shared information is done so strictly in accordance with established memoranda of understanding MOU and federal statutes governing information sharing, such as those pertaining to the False Claims Act and the DHS OIG statutory authority. This ensures that the investigation remains legally sound, evidence is admissible, and the integrity of the DHS OIG's investigative mandate is upheld. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and interagency protocol, which are paramount in federal investigations. An incorrect approach would be to unilaterally share sensitive investigative findings with California state authorities without first verifying the existence of a formal MOU or specific statutory authority permitting such disclosure. This bypasses established legal frameworks for information sharing, potentially violating privacy laws, confidentiality agreements, or the specific investigative jurisdiction of the state agency, thereby jeopardizing the investigation and exposing the agents to disciplinary action. Another incorrect approach would be to delay the investigation significantly while attempting to establish new, ad hoc information sharing agreements with California authorities. While diligence is important, an unreasonable delay can allow evidence to be destroyed or perpetrators to evade justice, undermining the OIG's mission. This demonstrates a failure to leverage existing protocols and a lack of proactive planning in interagency cooperation. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to assume that the federal investigation automatically grants access to all information held by California state agencies. This demonstrates a misunderstanding of jurisdictional boundaries and the legal requirements for interagency cooperation. Federal authority does not supersede state privacy laws or require state agencies to automatically disclose information without proper legal basis or agreement. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the specific legal and regulatory framework governing the investigation and any potential interagency cooperation. This includes consulting relevant statutes, regulations, and existing MOUs. Next, they should assess the nature of the information to be shared and the potential impact of disclosure on the investigation and all parties involved. Finally, they must act in strict accordance with established protocols, seeking legal counsel when necessary to ensure compliance and protect the integrity of the investigation. Question 18. What factors determine the appropriate course of action for a Department of Homeland Security, DHS, OIG special agent in California who, while conducting a routine audit at a federal facility, overhears a conversation suggesting potential financial fraud involving a foreign national employed by a contractor operating in a neighboring state? And the conversation also hints at potential violations of export control regulations. Option A. Conduct a preliminary, informal inquiry with the foreign national's employer in the neighboring state to gather more details before filing a formal report. Option B. Delay reporting the overheard conversation until a more significant pattern of suspicious activity emerges or until the agent has more concrete evidence. Option C. Document all observations meticulously and immediately report them through official DHS OIG channels to the appropriate investigative unit responsible for the jurisdiction where the suspected activity is occurring, while also noting the potential export control violation for separate assessment. Option D. Directly contact the foreign national's employer in the neighboring state to discreetly inquire about their employment and the nature of their work, without involving the DHS OIG. The correct answer is C. Document all observations meticulously and immediately report them through official DHS OIG channels to the appropriate investigative unit responsible for the jurisdiction where the suspected activity is occurring, while also noting the potential export control violation for separate assessment. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential conflict between an agent's personal observations and the established investigative procedures, requiring a delicate balance between proactive information gathering and adherence to jurisdictional boundaries and protocols. The agent must navigate the complexities of interagency cooperation and the limitations imposed by their specific authority within the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, OIG framework in California. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting all observations and immediately reporting them through official channels to the appropriate DHS OIG investigative unit responsible for the jurisdiction where the suspected activity is occurring. This approach ensures that information is handled by the designated authorities who possess the legal mandate and resources to investigate. It respects the jurisdictional boundaries established by federal law and DHS policy, preventing potential procedural errors or the compromise of an investigation. This aligns with the DHS OIG's mission to promote integrity, accountability, and efficiency within DHS, and its investigative guidelines which emphasize proper reporting and interagency collaboration. Failing to report the observations through official channels, and instead attempting to conduct a preliminary, unauthorized inquiry within another agency's purview, is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This bypasses established protocols, potentially interfering with ongoing investigations by other agencies or creating jurisdictional disputes. It also exposes the agent to accusations of overstepping their authority and violating the principles of interagency cooperation, Another incorrect approach involves directly contacting the foreign national's employer without prior authorization or coordination with the relevant DHS OIG investigative team. This action could jeopardize the investigation by tipping off the subject, compromising evidence, or violating privacy laws and DHS policies regarding external communications and information sharing. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of the proper investigative chain of command and the sensitivity required when dealing with foreign nationals and potential international implications. Finally, delaying the report until a later, more convenient time is also professionally unacceptable. Timeliness is crucial in investigations. Significant delays can lead to the loss of evidence, the disappearance of witnesses, or the continuation of illicit activities, thereby undermining the effectiveness of the OIG's oversight mission. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established protocols, clear communication, and respect for jurisdictional boundaries. When encountering information that falls outside their immediate purview but is relevant to DHS's mission, the primary step is to identify the correct investigative entity and report the findings through the designated reporting mechanisms. This ensures that investigations are conducted efficiently, legally, and ethically, upholding the integrity of the DHS OIG. Question 19. The monitoring system demonstrates a potential unauthorized access to sensitive case files related to an ongoing counterterrorism investigation being conducted by the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, in California. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for a special agent to take? Option A. Share the details of the suspected breach with colleagues in other federal agencies not directly involved in the investigation or incident response. Option B. Publicly disclose the potential breach to local news outlets to raise awareness about the security vulnerabilities. Option C. Immediately isolate the affected system, document the incident details, and report it through the established DHS chain of command and to the designated cybersecurity incident response team. Option D. Attempt to personally access and delete any suspicious data logs to cover up the potential breach before reporting it. The correct answer is C. Immediately isolate the affected system, document the incident details, and report it through the established DHS chain of command and to the designated cybersecurity incident response team. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a potential breach of sensitive information related to ongoing investigations within the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, in California. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires immediate and decisive action to protect national security interests and uphold the integrity of law enforcement operations, while also adhering to strict legal and ethical protocols governing evidence handling and reporting. The agent must balance the urgency of the threat with the procedural requirements to ensure any subsequent actions are legally sound and procedurally correct. The best professional practice involves immediately securing the compromised system and initiating a formal incident response protocol, as mandated by DHS directives and federal regulations concerning the handling of classified and sensitive information. This includes isolating the affected system to prevent further unauthorized access or data exfiltration, documenting the nature and extent of the suspected breach, and reporting the incident through the established chain of command and to the appropriate DHS cybersecurity and internal affairs units. This approach ensures that the integrity of the investigation is maintained, evidence is preserved, and a thorough, legally compliant investigation into the breach can be conducted. It directly aligns with DHS policies on information security and incident reporting, which prioritize the protection of sensitive data and the swift, authorized investigation of security vulnerabilities. An approach that involves immediately sharing the details of the suspected breach with external, non-authorized personnel or media outlets would be professionally unacceptable. This action would violate DHS security protocols, potentially compromise ongoing investigations by alerting adversaries, and could lead to severe legal and disciplinary consequences, bypasses the established reporting channels, and undermines the controlled, systematic process required for handling such sensitive matters. Another unacceptable approach would be to ignore the alert or delay reporting the incident, hoping it resolves itself or is a false positive. This inaction constitutes a dereliction of duty and a failure to protect critical government information. Such a delay could allow a breach to escalate, resulting in significant data loss, damage to national security, and a failure to meet the legal obligations to report and investigate security incidents promptly. Finally, an approach that involves attempting to personally investigate and remediate the breach without following established DHS incident response procedures and without proper authorization would also be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to the destruction or alteration of evidence, introduce further security risks, and violate departmental policies that dictate specific roles and responsibilities during security incidents. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established protocols, clear communication through authorized channels, and the preservation of evidence. This involves recognizing the severity of the alert, understanding the immediate need for containment, and meticulously following the documented incident response plan. The framework should emphasize the importance of reporting to the correct authorities and allowing specialized units to conduct the investigation and remediation. Question 20. Compliance review shows that a special agent in the U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) component of the Department of Homeland Security (DHS) worked 15 hours of overtime in a pay period. The agent's base hourly rate is $35.00, using the standard federal overtime calculation for non-exempt employees in the United States. What is the total overtime cost for this agent for that pay period? Option A, $525.00. Option B, $656.25. Option C, $787.50. Option D, $600.00. The correct answer is B, $656.25. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential for misinterpreting financial data and its impact on resource allocation within the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. Accurate calculation of overtime costs is critical for budget adherence and operational efficiency. A failure to correctly account for these costs can lead to budget shortfalls, impact staffing decisions, and potentially compromise mission readiness. The best professional practice involves a meticulous, step-by-step calculation that accounts for all relevant factors, including the standard hourly rate, overtime premium, and the total hours worked. This approach ensures accuracy and compliance with DHS financial regulations. Specifically, it requires identifying the base pay rate, determining the overtime multiplier, typically 1.5 times the base rate for federal employees, and then applying these to the documented overtime hours. The total overtime cost is the sum of the regular overtime pay and the premium pay. An incorrect approach would be to simply multiply the total hours worked by the base hourly rate and then add a flat percentage for overtime. This method fails to accurately capture the statutory overtime premium, leading to an underestimation of actual costs. This violates DHS financial management directives that mandate precise calculation of compensation. Another incorrect approach is to average the overtime hours across all agents and apply a generalized overtime cost. This method ignores individual overtime records and can mask significant discrepancies in actual overtime worked by specific agents or units, leading to inaccurate budget forecasting and potential inequity in compensation. It also fails to adhere to the principle of accounting for actual expenditures. A further incorrect approach involves using a simplified, rounded figure for overtime costs without performing detailed calculations. This lack of precision can lead to significant financial misstatements and is contrary to the rigorous financial accountability expected within federal agencies. It bypasses the necessary due diligence in financial reporting. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes accuracy, adherence to established financial protocols, and transparency. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the relevant financial regulations and compensation policies. 2. Breaking down complex calculations into manageable steps. 3. Verifying all input data, e.g., hours worked, pay rates. 4. Performing cross-checks to ensure the final calculation is logical and defensible. 5. Documenting the calculation process clearly for auditability.